Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I can see some familiar faces, people that actually I don't know. So can I ask how many scientists or engineers are in the room first? Right, okay. So I'm going to be asking some questions, though. So don't be stressed, it's fine. But I tend to do that in my lectures as well, especially when I don't know what I'm talking about. So the title of my talk is always a bit wrong. I'm a mathematical modeler, and a model is just always a bit wrong. Well, some models can be very wrong, but the models that we produce, at least the ones we try to produce, are models that are just on the right side of being wrong. And we make some assumptions and some simplifications. And hopefully these models help clinicians get it right. So I see Janice somewhere. Where are you, Janice? Where are you sitting? Over there, my clinician friend who keeps me on the straight and narrow. Right, so I will tell you some stories about our work. So just for Richard, my boss, who's at the back, I don't only work on this. I'm not on a one-trick pony, but the things that I'm gonna talk about are things that we do touch upon. So what to expect from this talk? First, a little bit of my journey. So Alyssa came back to me yesterday. I didn't have anything about myself. She said, people want to know. It's like, really? Okay. So I put something about myself. So then we're going to discuss about models and a cholera outbreak nearby. Living through the hype. So we're going to talk about hypes in the modeling space, rogue lies and bent truth with some examples and a bit of a discussion. Then we're going to talk about AI. So yeah, this is going to be, I know. We're going to talk about AI, and we are going to discuss why do we use these models then, if they're always a bit wrong, how can they help, why do they help? And then I've been told that there is wine afterwards. So that's something to be looking forward to. So for the people online, well, you only get this. So. Okay, so a bit of a journey. Oh, it looks a bit blurry, but okay. So I spent many of my formative years in Caracas. So, and Alisa was adamant that I show you pictures of myself throughout the years. So I think you can see the slow but relentless decline. So Caracas, right? So that was me around 2000, 1998, and a serendipitous meeting with a professor from France offered me the opportunity to move across a whole ocean to go to Lille to do my PhD in applied math. So that's me around 2003. And so I remember my grandma, so she has now passed, but she lived in Italy, and she told me, oh my God, in Lille, the weather's terrible, right? So Southern Europe, nice, right? So in Caracas, it's sunshine guaranteed all year long. So I said, I don't think that you can do worse. I said, well, is that a challenge? Hold my beer. Because I then went to Sheffield. So as a Marie Curie research fellow, so I applied with absolutely zero hope to a fellowship from the European Commission and got it. And went to Sheffield, where I actually had a fantastic time. And these people shaped my whole career. So I went to expand my horizons. So I came with the knowledge of multi-scale systems that I did during my PhD, so very much applied maths. And then they opened me into all this world of patient-specific modeling. So then, you know, you might think, well, a career is always well planned. Well, yeah, sure. So I was finishing my fellowship, and my idea was to go back to France. So I wanted to go back to the good weather, right? Good food. So, but this one position opened in UCL in 2007. And my boss at the time, so my line manager in Sheffield, said, I think you should apply. So I said to my husband, who's sitting here, he's my long-suffering husband of many years now. So I said to him, fine, I'll apply, you know, I'm not gonna get it, so keep packing. Yeah, so, but I did get it. And actually Mohan, where are you, Mohan? He was on my appointment committee. Yeah, weren't you? So, well, this is on you, I have to say. So I was appointed as a lecturer in 2007. And then more pictures of me. So you can see around 2013, I look like that. Now I look like this. So And then I became a professor in 2019. So in the meantime, other things that were not academic also happened. So I got married, right? So in 2004, and in between, you might be saying there is a gap in that CV. Between 2003 and 2005, I worked not for Formula One, I worked for Renault Formula One on the cooling of their cars. I'm really sorry for the people who are passionate about Formula One. I could not be bothered about those cars. So I thought I am going to go and do my thing, my way, right? So I'm interested in bioengineering, so that's what I'm gonna do, right? So, and that's when I wrote my fellowship and got it, right? So then also in 2016, I became a liver heme research fellow just at the same time that I was about to give birth. So I had a baby, so the baby is now grown and is here, right? And that's her at about 7 months old, and then that's her in 2019. So just to reassure you, we are in 2025. We are not about to relive 2020. That's something that nobody wants. Yeah, so the timeline finishes here for 2019, but I became a professor many years ago, but amongst other things, the pandemic complicated things, so we're doing this now. So, oh, and by the way, my daughter made me promise to keep this under an hour, so I'm aiming for 45 minutes, so at any time, at the 45-minute mark, just say, stop it, stop it. Okay, so, right, so let's talk about, you thought that this was a talk about models. I'm gonna show you a map, actually. Does anyone know what this map is about?
Jon Snow.
Jon Snow, right? So does anyone else know what Jon Snow, who Jon Snow is? It's not from Game of Thrones. Yes, that is also a Jon Snow, but this is a map of all London, right? So all London, how old? I'm gonna take you back in time to 1854. 1854, and that is actually quite close from here. 1854, these were the living conditions of the people who lived in Soho. Right, so it's not a swanky place that we know right now. It was very derelict, very crowded. It was the slums, right, in Soho. And there was a massive cholera outbreak in that area. Now, the people at the time still believed in something called the miasma. So for the Greeks in the room, what does miasma mean? Air, pollution, right, polluted air. So people had this theory that many diseases like cholera, who's a bacteria, transmitted through foul air, so things that didn't smell quite right. Now, I'm gonna point some things out for you. Let me see, okay. So I've pointed in the map the pumps, the water pumps that were in the Soho area at that time where people used to get their water. So if you were a child or you were, you know, in one of those houses, you would have to get out of the house, so there was no sanitation, so, and everything, so all the byproducts, you know, human feces, everything would go into the ground and contaminate the waters. But those are the water pumps, and I want you to focus on the bigger circle, the larger circle in the middle. And what you're seeing as the black bars are the deaths by cholera in 1854 in that part of London, okay? So remember that people didn't know how this was transmitted, right? But there was this one man, Jon Snow, not from Game of Thrones, a physician, who said, actually, with my map, I'm going to interview these people. I'm going to go with a map, and I'm going to record all the deaths. And he saw, actually, the area should be a little bit larger, that all the deaths were around that water pump. So, this is in Broad Street, now it's Broadwick Street, and I'll show you in a second where that is exactly. By removing a handle from a water pump, so he actually took the handle so people could not go and get more water from that water pump, he stopped the outbreak, right? So just with a map, data, and frankly, some guts, because he had the evidence and he was able to reason through that evidence and say, we think, or I think, that this is what's happening, right? He's also a famous anesthetist, by the way. So models are like that. They are like maps. They are not a territory, but they simplify complex problems. Jon Snow did not need all the pebbles and all the materials with which all these buildings were built. So you build a model for your needs. And they help us understand, predict, and make decisions. And just like a map can show everything, they don't capture every detail, but they still guide us. And that's what models are like. However, we are working in healthcare, and verbal reasoning alone and medical problems and biology is far too complex to only use a map or pen and paper and some data. And that's why we use computational models to analyze this data and to model or replicate the things that we think we understand. So, by the way, there is a really good blog. It's an old blog from 2013. They used to have something called the data blog, where they tell you the story of Jon Snow, and they used to have an interactive map and everything. It's gone now because I tested it this morning. But you can see some of the interviews that he made and people who said, yes, I came from far away and I was fine, then I drank water from this pump or water, so I collected my water and I drank it and now I'm unwell. Okay, so if you want a story, that is a very good story there. So, just to show you where that is, it's actually 1 mile away from here. So the cholera outbreak was very close by, so that would be our neighbors who were having this. And Jon Snow actually changed the way in which he completely challenged public health and what we knew at the time about public health. He completely transformed this, and that map that I showed you before is legendary. So a lot of people know it. So now we are not going to talk about models, actually. I don't know how many of you thought that you would see Bill Clinton today, but hey, you know, so let me show you something. Okay, so before we talk about models, we need to talk about all these hypes, right? So that we have in science. So the Human Genome Project was a £2 billion project, $2 billion project, possibly a little bit more than that. The promise was this is a video from 2020, right? They said in 20 years we would the whole entire space of healthcare would be transformed. We would have completely changed the way we treat diseases. We are in 2025 right now. Okay, so things do take time, and we do go through this cycle of there is a technology trigger, like for example the Human Genome Project, right? The sequencing of the human genome. Then you reach a peak of expectation. There is a lot of positivity, and then somehow you start being disappointed because all the hype didn't live up to the expectations. Eventually we learn, and then the technology stabilizes. And there are many, many different hypes and many of these things that happen routinely. So can anyone name one? Now, we're living it. AI, right? So anyway, I don't want to be revoked my modeler's card today, right? So I'm not going to be saying that AI is useless. So the Modelers Guild, they should be happy with my presentation today, but there is a lot of hype about AI and how it can transform healthcare. It is transformative. Is it going to change entirely the way that we do things? Well, the answer to that, in my view, right, and this is my lecture, so you're suffering through this, yes, the answer for me is no. So, and I'm going to tell you maybe why I think that's not the case. So, let's talk about models then, finally, right? So we get into the meat of this. So, oh God, no Bill Clinton again. Okay, so, so these are some of the newspaper articles and some news outlets, what they have to say about AI, for example, and human genome at 20, right? So breakthrough led to anticlimax and arrests. Actually, if you're wondering what the arrest is this Chinese scientist who used CRISPR. So essentially, he edited human genome from 2 twins, and that is considered completely unethical. And then he was sent to prison because of that, right? So, and then another big project that said we're going to build a brain, the human brain, how it works, with all the bells and whistles. €1 billion project collapsed. Okay. And it's because we keep thinking that just by putting things together, we can replicate what nature does. And that is absolutely not correct, right? So it's not by building like Legos that we can see what actually the whole symphony of things that happen and that make you actually are. So one question for the audience. So if you are a biologist or have a knowledge of genetics, please just don't say anything. I'm going to ask, how many genes do you think a human has after it has been sequenced and all of that? So we know. So how many genes? Just to give you our frame of reference, an onion has about 60,000. I mean, between 30 and 60,000. So how many?
45.
Right? So there is a taker here at 45. Who else? So not looking on the phones. So who else? 100,000, okay.
I thought it was reduced to 25,000.
Sorry?
It was reduced to 25,000.
Yeah, I said if you know the answer, don't say it. So it's about 25,000, right? So we have, I mean, allegedly 3 times less genes than an onion. And you know, be my guest if you want to argue why onions are more complex than humans. So I'll give you this platform. I'm very interested in your thinking. But we cannot, right? So, I mean, we have 25,000 genes. Now, of those 25,000 genes, how many do you think that actually make useful things like proteins? If you're wondering what a protein is just makes stuff. Makes your body do stuff or actually makes stuff. So your nails, hair, so those are proteins, or they can make tools so your body actually do the stuff that it's supposed to do. So how much of that genome do you think is involved in protein making? So those are the premium genes, right? So the top. So how many? What percentage you reckon?
Half of it.
Half of it, you think? Okay. 5%. Okay, another? If we pull everyone, eventually we'll get to the right answer. So it's about 2%, a bit less than 2%, okay? So that means that 98% of the genome, we don't know what it does, okay? Well, now we're beginning to understand, but people thought this is junk DNA, right? So this is a surplus of all this evolution, right? So the ones that matter are those 2%. Well, what happened with the Human Genome Project, when we thought it would transform and let us, understand everything, what opened was more questions, actually. And this is what happens with science all the time. So we think that we have the answer, and then it turns out that we just don't know. So this dark matter of the genome, what do they do? Why are they there? They actually turn out to be quite important, right? Because they might be, is not only the genes that you are, it's your relationships with the environment, what you eat, your lifestyle, yeah? So it's what switches do we switch on and off, right? So in all of that might be encoded in the different genes that actually make the proteins, who we thought were the really useful ones. So, I mean, the whole point is that we discover something, we hype it, we think we know, and then we're humbled again by nature by just saying, no, this is not the way, you just keep digging, right? So, anyways, we're going to talk about models finally, okay? So, I cannot tell you all the plethora of lies that we tell because actually I will be kicked out, my boss is there, I just cannot possibly, admit to all the things that we do. Right, but I'm going to talk about some of the things that we do, and then you can understand how difficult it is sometimes to make those judgment calls with the data that we have and with how complex things are. So we're gonna talk about the big elephant in the room, that is that AI will solve all of our problems, everything, right? So from imaging to, and I see that there are imaging experts over there, so we're not gonna pick up a fight, Gary, today. Not today, Gary, not today. So, but we're going to talk about how can this help, and maybe we need to rethink the way that we use AI. Okay, So I'm going to talk a lot about aortas. It's not the only thing I do, so just I would reiterate that for my boss at the back. So, but we model, we try to help vascular surgeons or cardiac surgeons to understand what happens when a patient is going to be intervened on. So we typically take a subset, so we take a part of the body, and then we say, we're going to simulate this and tell you what's going on with all the blood flow. So because the clinicians, at least the vascular surgeons that I work with, they are interested primarily on, keeping the patient alive, obviously, that goes without saying, but also to restore flow, okay? So there is a flow that is being disrupted. You need blood flow to keep your tissues alive and all of that. So they need to restore flow. That is one of the main goals, right? So, and then they have to take a whole bunch of things into consideration. So I'm looking at Janice at the back, and she's looking at me like, be careful what you say. So if you have any clinical questions, Janice is there to answer them. But a model is just a representation of reality. And this is what a good quality CT scan looks like, right? So we've all gone through CT scans eventually. So we isolate. So that scan at the back had everything. All the organs, bones, everything, right? So we extract the part that we are interested in. So in this case, this is a very pathological aorta. So your aorta does not look like that. This is the aorta of a dissected patient, or a dissected aorta of a patient. That means that there is a tear, so there is a rupture, not like an aneurysm. It doesn't go outside. The blood flow goes inside the inner layer of the aorta and creates big aneurysmal regions, and they don't all look like that, by the way. They are all unique. So there is one of a kind for each one of you, if it happens to you, which I hope it won't. It's a relatively rare condition, but it does kill more people than road traffic accidents in the UK, just for you to know, so not as rare. So I want to convince you that I'm going to simulate there is actually part of, is this. So we have to make some assumptions. We need to put, so when you have this type of problem, so then you say, I chop my aorta here, right? So I need to know what I'm going to put at the boundary. So I need to know what I'm going to put at the inlet. So that's the inlet of the aorta that should connect to your heart valve, to your aortic valve, and then to the heart. And then you have outlets, so you can see at the top and then at the bottom, right, that communicate with the rest of your body. Right, so those are really, really important things to get right, because if you don't get them right, then you're simulating nonsense, okay? So rubbish going in, rubbish going out. So we need to get some proper measurements. We need to get some proper, data from the patient, so I can tell you what is actually happening inside. And you might be thinking, why would you ever want to know what happens inside? Well, for example, in a dissected aorta, the clinicians are usually interested in what happens in what we call the false lumen. So it's this aneurysm that forms, this region that forms that shouldn't really be there, because it can rupture and that can be catastrophic. So they want to be able to estimate pressures, but they won't go in with a catheter. That's very dangerous. So they won't put a wire and measure your pressure inside. They want to estimate it, for example, so we can do some calculations for them, or at least that's what we tell them. Anyway, so we need patient-specific anatomical details. So this is what we have, what we call boundary conditions and flow models. So boundary conditions are what's happening at the boundary, so all the math that we have to do. So you can actually say, if this were connected to something like this, it would behave in the way that it should, right? So, and then blood, for example, what is the model that we choose for blood? Right, so blood is what we call a non-Newtonian fluid, so that means that it doesn't really behave like water, for example. So it's funny in that way. It just will react to how how much you stretch it and in which way you stretch it, and it will behave in one way or another. So we need to choose the right models for that, and then we need to also capture the motion. Your aorta actually moves a lot. The motion, and all of that is superbly complicated. So there are many things that can go wrong, very wrong, when you work with a model like this, and there are many lies that you can actually tell. So let me tell you the kind of data and the quality of the data that we have. So you saw the CT, good quality, right? So anatomical detail, superb. So we have, and this is not the whole plethora of images that we work with, right? So we have MR angiography. Look at that. It looks wonderful, doesn't it? Very blurry, actually. Try to make a trace of the edges of that aorta and you will be off. In one way or another, 1 pixel, 2 pixel, who knows how many pixels, right? But we have to work with data like that. This is a CineMR of a slice of aortic dissection. The CineMR will give you the movement, right? So you have this movement of the aorta, so you will have the pulsation and you will have the false lumen and the true lumen. This, well, we're going from bad to worse actually. So this is a Doppler ultrasound that a lot of us have had in the past, so they are incredibly useful actually. But Doppler ultrasound, I mean, okay, so there are good Dopplers and bad Dopplers. This is very what we call operator dependent. Everyone who will do a Doppler ultrasound will get a kind of a different reading. So all the readings will look different than this. So we trace the shape of the ultrasound and we say, oh, maybe we can use this as a boundary condition for our problem, right? And then on the right, I'm telling you what is all the rage right now is the 4D MR slice at the abdominal aorta. So we just imagine that you have your aorta, you cut or you measure things, so you have a slice that goes through here, through your abdomen, and then it will tell you with the color map, so it has some scales, what are the velocities and where, okay? So I don't want to spend far too long on this, but the point is that this data is difficult to work with. There is a lot that can go wrong when you process this data. And we have to do a fair amount of processing when working with this data. If we don't disclose in the papers that we publish what kind of processing did we did, how did we do it, then in a way we're lying even if by omission, right? Because that is not the raw data. The problem is that the raw data is full of uncertainties, full of errors, full of noise. So we have to make do, okay? So don't worry, I have a colleague that is tasked with keeping me on the straight and narrow. So what did you say this morning or this afternoon, Stavrula, that you are the ground truth? Yes, because she's the experimentalist, you see? So she does keep me on the straight and narrow. So I don't have a problem with lying, like, okay, yeah, that's fine. So anyway, so let me show you another. So other lies that we can tell is that typically, and I'll show you one example, we have done it, right? So this aorta is really highly resolved. You can see a lot of small vessels along the aorta that normally you don't see, okay? So you can see those are what we call the intercostals or segmental vessels. So you have vessels everywhere coming from your aorta because you need to feed a lot of organs and the blood has to flow fast and efficiently everywhere, right? So typically in these models, we say, oh, those segmentals, they don't matter, it's fine. They don't matter. Why? Because we cannot usually resolve them, okay? So it's a hard problem to crack, okay? They cannot, you don't know necessarily what they are, how big they are, etc. So we just remove them. But there is a big chunk of the flow from the aorta that goes into those small vessels. So depending what you're looking for, this stuff actually matters, okay? And when I am asking someone, so I'm an associate editor for a good journal now, and when I'm asking people to consider in their discussion what the implications are of their models, I'm not asking them to reduce simulations, but I'm asking them to consider the evidence and the things that actually matter and to declare it in black and white, okay? So, for example, for that same aorta, then you can see that we did the simulations with the small vessels, that are the ones in red, so that you can see there, and without the small vessels. Right? And what we can see is that actually what we're seeing here is what we call the time average Walsh stress patterns. And for those of you who don't know, that means that the cells alongside the aorta, they sense the force that they're receiving, and that is a measure of that. Okay? And that has important implications because your endothelium, which is the one that is sensing, sends signals to inside of your arterial wall and says, we need to do this, you need to reproduce more, and you need to die now, and you need to, okay? So it gives all these instructions to all these cells inside, and what you get is that what we call vascular remodeling. So by doing these calculations like this, without all the segmentals, actually we find different Walsh stress patterns, okay? And if we want to make any any educated guesses about any vascular remodeling if we actually believe, and this is an old discussion for another day, about the role of time average Walsh stress or Walsh stress in vascular remodeling, yeah, then you have to know that these things matter. You cannot make those claims so easily, okay? So we can definitely lie, and we lie by omission quite a lot in the models that we do by just assuming things, and we think that this is not important. We estimate that this doesn't matter. It does matter. And by the way, you haven't even realized, I'm not even telling you that this aorta that is there simulated, where I'm just being all, pontificating about it, this is a rigid wall aorta. This is as hard as a bar of steel, okay? The movement of your aorta is not taken into account in those simulations at all, okay? But if I don't say it, you don't know it, okay? So, ignoring uncertainty, yet another problem. So you realize what the data was like, right? So the data is not pretty. Medical data is dirty. It's dirty, it's incomplete, it's difficult to deal with, right? So this is what a normal aorta looks like, okay? And this was a paper that we published in about 2020, where we had to integrate a lot of information from MRA. So you saw what angiography MR was like, 4D flow MRI, 2D cine MRI, into producing a computational workflow. So essentially that means that we tell you how to compute things based on these images, yeah? And these are the results that we got. Now, I'm gonna just tell you there are many problems with this data, actually. We had a horrible time with this paper. And the truth is that the 4DMR measurements, they are always wrong, but they are always wrong. They seriously underpredict peak velocities. They are not good at the boundaries. So close to the walls of your aorta, the noise is too high for those measurements to actually work, right? So, and there was a discrepancy between the MRA and the 2D CineMR, so between the two imaging modalities, of up to 30% in area, right? When we looked at the slices, we had to virtually modify this aorta so we could make them the two match, okay? And we simulated this with the typical assumptions that we do, right? So you can actually see that here, the area of the 4D flow MR, which are the actual measurements, seems bigger than the actual aorta, and that is because we think that this is an artificial area. We thought, and we think we're right, an artificial area created by the flow MR because the velocities are so low, right? So we took it and we put it in the paper. So this is the raw data, right? We put it in the paper so we could actually explain why we think that our simulations are actually trustworthy and in some cases even better than the 4DMR, right? To trust in some areas, because also there is a caveat here. We're using part of this data to validate our model. So validation means we are checking that our model is right by using partially some of this data. So it's a bit of a, so you have to be careful with what you do there, right? And this is just, so we went full on. I think Katrina, this is the work of Katrina Stokes. She did a fantastic job of trying to assess the uncertainty due to the different data modalities that we had and the noise that we had, etc., in our simulation. So we reported that. Now, right, overfitting, bad models. And actually, I don't have a model to explain this, okay? We don't do overfitting. Overfitting is like a conspiracy theorist, okay? So you have all the dots, and it will join all the dots, and it will mean absolutely nothing, okay? So it will explain all your data, but it will generalize very poorly, okay? So it explains absolutely nothing. So overfitting can happen in the type of models that we do when you, for example, have a bajillion parameters that make no sense or have no physiological meaning, but actually help you to fit, your model, your curve is closer to this data point and closer to this data point. So essentially you maneuver your model to be as close to the data as you can. And this happens a lot in AI, by the way. So you see this typically in papers, AI, there is a lot of, overfitting, so we must be aware of overfitting, okay? So now we're gonna move on to the big chunk, that is AI, right? So AI is the solution to all healthcare problems. And actually, I didn't put something there, so it would be a fifth point, but we can discuss it later. So AI does not work when your data is scarce, okay? And in the world where we are being told we have bajillions of data, data is everywhere. Data in healthcare for the stuff that we want to model is incredibly scarce sometimes. So when interpretability matters, and in regulated industries like healthcare, for example, where you want to know, so decisions can not only be made by a black box, you need to understand why, if you have a decision support system or you have something that is giving you an answer, you want to know why. You want to know back to the cause. It's about a cause and effect relationship, right? So another one is when computational resources are limited, but computational power is expanding, so we have more and more. And then the fourth one is that the data is very, very dirty. And I just gave you a few examples of the data that we have. First of all, we don't have a lot of it. And second is sometimes the quality is really questionable and the data is incredibly dirty, a lot of noise. So this is the CEO of Novartis. This was from 2019, right? So I checked and he's still the CEO of Novartis this morning. So he says, I think people underestimate how little clean data there is out there and how hard it is to clean and link the data. And this is crucial, right? And they have invested a lot in AI. So they're partnering with Microsoft to try to power their drug design pipelines. But the truth is that we don't know. I mean, if the data is dirty, your intelligent machines, for more intelligent, be all the intelligence they are, they cannot see the forest from the trees, and that is the problem. So I'm going to give you an example of how we have used AI with mechanistic models, and this is going to bring me to the end of my talk. So we did a paper in 2019 where we wanted to, we worked on early detection of coronary heart disease, and this is a condition that many of our family members would have, and essentially you have a narrowing in your coronaries. So we have experts in the room, Professor Torrey is at the back there. So you have your coronaries and they are crowded, they become narrower because you build plaque, okay? So this is atherosclerosis. And the clinical problem, or the problem, was that to detect coronary heart disease, clinicians rely on ECG, so electrocardiograms. So they put your electrodes and they will do an ECG. They will do other things as well, but they do rely on ECG for visual inspection. And then there is intersubject variability that plays a role when assessing the risk. So who are you, what do you do, where is your lifestyle, etc. But what's your age and what do you do for a job, etc. Right? And then coronary heart disease is silent. Most people will only know that they have coronary heart disease because they have a stroke or a heart attack, okay? It will manifest at the worst possible time, and for some people it's the one and only, and they're done, okay? So we said, okay, let's try to, so this is what an ECG looks like, and people are supposed to be looking at this and saying, yeah, sure, this doesn't look quite right. Anyway, at the time, the lack of relevant data sets, but I did check, and there are no new papers actually from this year that look at relevant data sets, have precluded the development of machine learning methods to look at this data and for early detection of this ischemia in the coronaries. So what we proposed at the time was to generate pseudo-ECGs using what we call a virtual population of models. So this is an experimentally calibrated virtual population of models. So we took models of heart cells, we put them one next to the other, we created a line of cells, and we said we're going to create pseudo-ECGs that we're actually going to generate a virtual patient population, so many yous living in a computer, right, that actually reflect how diverse and different we are. And we're going to analyze those signals using machine learning. Right? So, and this is the paper from 2019. So, if you imagine many of those patients, and we can actually capture the variability in the population, what we are proposing is completely different from just putting through tons and tons of data and say, we hope for the best. Okay, let's do some number crunching, it will work itself out. So we said, let's put some mechanistic understanding, what we call, do we know how these ECGs are generated? We're going to train these intelligent machines on the data that we have generated. And so it's easier for them, right, to follow the path because it's less noisy. There is less error, okay? There are less things clouding, okay, what they are supposed to be looking for, okay? So the path is clearer, so they can actually learn on cleaner data what they need to do. And then you can use your machine learning for classification. And then you can go back and look at the patients that are similar maybe, and then say, this patient here that is virtual doesn't exist is actually quite similar to this patient here that actually does exist and is in my database. Okay, so can we look at that? And then you can look at medication, what's happening with the potassium of this patient, etc. Right? So my point is that, as I said, this is the general machine learning approach, right? So, and I would advise you to, if you have time and the inclination, go onto this website. It's very funny. This person is very funny. They draw all these cartoons, but essentially you have all this pile of data. And then if it doesn't work, that's fine. You just rejig it, okay? Try to do something else with it and then see if that actually works. I mean, this is very unscientific. I have a massive problem with this, especially because we always go back to wanting to understand why things happen the way they happen, okay? So what did we actually learn from that analysis of the pseudo-ECGs is that variability precludes the classification of ischemia, so you cannot classify ischemia through a single biomarker, so you can not only do it once, so it's a multitude of things that you need to take into account. It makes impossible this variability to, no, not yet. Impossible to determine the presence and severity of ischemia. And the final one, which I thought it was more intriguing, is that variability originated at the cellular level, so on those cells, and what is telling me about the system is amplified and in some cases distorted when you have the measurements of the ECG. So what people typically say, this is the phenotype, right? So these are the things that are easy to measure that we have. Well, let's put these intelligent machines to actually look through this. It might be happening that at different layers of biological organization, you need details because they impact the outcome at the end. And this is not something that we're even exploring right now. So no wonder detection is poor when you look at the signals, right? So why do we use these models?
There are more than 21 million articles currently catalogued in biomedical literature. How can medical practitioners use all of this information? It's an impossible mission for clinicians to stay on top of all this data. Our best attempt so far has been to split up the patient and focus on organs. Wouldn't it be great to be able to use this wealth of wonderful knowledge for analysis in an integrated way, where clear signals enable preventative medicine? Treatments could consider the human body as a whole, as opposed to specialist views of each component part. There should be an individual map for each patient, creating personalized healthcare, with the clinician being able to generate cause-effect hypotheses to make the right treatment decisions, sharing this knowledge with specialists of the required fields.
Okay, so why do we use these models if they are always a bit wrong? And we do a lot of mechanistic models, and a lot of mechanistic models now combined with AI. So we try to, AI is transformative, okay? So there is no two ways about this, it is. But we need to use it the right way, I think. So this has been overhyped, but models help us make sense of the world. Biological complexity is far too great to understand by verbal reasoning alone. And you can see all the images that I show you, those are that's the data that the clinicians deal with day in, day out. And they need to make all their calculations in here and say, well, actually, this makes sense, right? So they can personalize medicine, so we can tailor those models to you or a virtual patient that looks more like you, okay? They support fast and better decisions and an extra layer of information and analysis. And they save time and money. And they also help clinicians to reflect on their own practice, because the simulations might give you outcomes that are completely counterintuitive, but that's okay, because it's very hard for them to work out everything that's going to happen. Images can only tell you about the present, but what the clinicians want to know is about the future. If I do this, what's going to happen to this person, right? So models can help you do that. So George Box, a British statistician, said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I would say all models are wrong, some are useful, and the wise clinician knows the difference. So this is the end of my TED Talk. Thank you very much. So I said I was happy to take some questions if you have any. We have a few minutes to spare, so I'm going to ask you, sorry? Jake, speak up. What do you mean? 8 minutes, okay. Right, so I'm going to ask you to make wise choices today, not to choose violence. So don't ask me the really hard questions that I don't know how to answer, but I'm very happy just to, you know, answer any questions, nice questions that you might have. Okay, so a question there. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so I mean, you're talking about how scarce good data is for the kind of thing you're looking at. I mean, it's just a thought experiment, and I know that I probably get to depend, but just to get your thoughts on it. What would you think would be preferable? 100 patients that have, say, I don't know, a 10-minute ECG reading, or 200 that have 5? Because I'm looking at your thing and wondering, is it more numbers of people is more important, or this fewer people but say longer ECG readings where you get maybe more of a stable reading of the stuff you've got? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I do have thoughts. So actually, we are working on a similar problem. Where are you, Manuel? Manuel, manifest yourself. Okay, so he's my PhD student, right? So, and he's whiz with computers, right? So we've been looking at machine learning classification of ECGs, actually. So this is all Manuel's work. I don't want to steal his thunder, but what he has realized, although I cannot really tell you a lot because we want to publish this in a really good journal, so let's, you know, we're going to keep it on the rocks until then, is that if you feed this data in smaller bits, so you might have large chunks of data, right? So long recordings, okay? Feed that to your machine, okay? Or take each individual snapshot, so divide it into whatever chunks is meaningful, and feed it to the machine. The machine will obviously do better on the smaller chunks. It will learn, okay? When it will struggle to learn, maybe the other way. So, but there is the bottom line of AI and deep learning is that you need a lot of data. You need a lot of data also because we have a lot of variability in the population. So if I come back to the case of the dissections that we had before, where each dissection is unique, I can see AI struggling entirely to actually automate or make models automatic. They can calculate what are the best, you know, surgical scenarios. So we operate on this patient this way or that way. What's the blood flow going to be for that patient? Because there is no systematic, I mean, all dissections are different, right? And there are some that look really horrible. So actually we have a clinician in the audience. Hello, another one, Finn. So, and you know, so all the data looks really different from one another. So you would need so many patients. And even in that case, I'm not even sure that we would be able to generalize just using pure machine learning. Okay. Another question? Yeah, sure.
AI always worries me, I mean, from the creative industry. Are we becoming more too reliant on AI and accepting the data that it's producing as the sort of common, you know, I suppose, reality that's worth listening? Or, you know, are we not controlling and double checking enough to clarify that its calculations are more on the truth side than the wrong side?
I mean, I'm not sure I'm getting the question right, because obviously you need to have some data that you're assuming is what we call the ground truth. So this is what we know. That's basically what the ground truth means. So you either trusted or not trusted. Yeah, so then you do your calculations with that data, and then you say, I'm classifying, you know, I have 3 classes of patients, or I have 3 classes of, I don't know, whatever, right? So, but are we becoming too over-reliant on AI? Absolutely, we are. We are, and I don't think it's, you know, it is a bit of a problem, because we need to be able to question. So whoever knows me knows that I'm healthily skeptical, right? So that's how I would describe myself. I'm always trying to dig in to understand what's going on, right? So it's very easy to accept things that actually look like the truth. But if you don't understand what is actually generating that, it is a bit of a problem for me. But we can see it with ChatGPT, right? So lots of people using ChatGPT, you know, large language models to you know, write me a novel. I mean, they can. So you come from the creative industry, right? So there are many problems with AI now, with people just writing whole novels, right? Whole books in AI. So we are becoming, it's easy, right? In what comes easy, I think our brain likes it in a way, like, oh, it is easy, I don't have to do so much work. It is a problem. So sorry, I don't have a very straightforward answer for you. So somebody said, oh, I probably am gonna get the, yeah, maybe, it depends on the case. So that's exactly what you're getting. So I'm sorry, yeah, but that's what I have to say.
Just to follow up to that question, why is it a problem?
If you don't understand where it comes from,
AI is writing books and making interesting.
Oh, there are many problems. Well, come and fight me on this. You know, I think there are many problems. I do see a lot of problems with AI writing books. I mean, there is a livelihood of people that actually write the books. I mean, you know, there are many ethical considerations about the use of AI, and I think that's one of the main, you know, your main concerns maybe, right? So people, instead of giving work to writers or to actually graphic designers, they just have these AI tools. So it depends on how we use them, right? So I'm not saying, I'm not a denier. I think it's transformational, but we have to be a bit careful about the things that we do. And nobody can convince me, I mean, you can fight me on this, that something that comes from the work and the imagination of someone is less worthy, or the AI in that case is more worthy than what comes from the hard work of people. I mean, we become lazy in a way. So, but that's my take. So that's not an academic reflection on anything. I'm not an ethicist, and I don't work in ethics, right? But for me, that is a concern.
So when the calculator came out, was that a problem?
No. There are some areas for which AI works. So I think I've ruffled some feathers here, maybe from the image, from the medical physicist here. So no. There are some areas in which AI works really well. So automation of image, for example, and classification of images, that's really good. And that works really well because we're talking about pixels, you know, and Gary is going to tell me off. It's like, it's not all about pixels. Okay, Gary, okay. But, you know, it works well in some cases. Now, in cases where we actually need the mechanistic understanding of what's happening with the biology, what's happening with the patient, do we understand how to treat this patient this way or that way? I think we need to pause, honestly. But there are some things for which AI is absolutely magnificent. You know, I use ChatGPT now. I refused to use ChatGPT before. But now I'm like, I'm going to write this, and it's all not very good. ChatGPT, help me streamline this text and make it 200 words. So, I mean, but, you know, we need to learn how to use AI the right way. Otherwise, we become de-skilled. And this is a problem that is, you know, you speak to the medics and they are concerned. They were concerned before AI. They were concerned when all this modeling came about, so about being de-skilled. So we lose our skills.
I'm an orthopedic surgeon, and robots are coming into surgery, and it's improving outcomes, and they're smart robots. What's wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong if everything goes right. Now, the moment your robot doesn't work, do you need to have someone there to say, I can do this, and then he goes and do it? I mean, would you leave the robot alone with your patient? The answer to that is no. So it depends.
The of most surgeons, the errors made by surgeons without the robot, much greater. You look at the spread.
Sure. If you speak to the patients, though, they will tell you, I want someone to be responsible for the stuff that's happening to me.
I want a responsible surgeon with a tool that can deliver the job to the robot.
Of course.
Surgery
98% sentences most of the time. The outcomes will take a lot.
So if the outcomes are bad, I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use it. So all I'm saying is if your robot goes wrong, somebody has to be able to come and fix what the robot couldn't do. Because it would be a terrible situation to be in where you leave everything to its own devices and then suddenly there is a power outage. And then you might think, well, this is bad engineering because we would have a generator in the hospital, so there would be no power outage. Oh, okay, fine. But assume that there is something that goes wrong. Somebody needs to be able to actually check, right, that they are happy with what is happening, isn't it? I mean, I would think as a patient, so I'm not a surgeon, right? So you are the surgeon. I am the patient. As a patient, I'm telling you, I want someone to be responsible for it. So I cannot really speak for things that I don't know about, but I can speak as a person and as a patient. And I want for people to be responsible and to understand what they are doing. Sure.
Just to follow up, but not to follow up. I was hoping, having some familiarity with you, I was hoping you would tell us everything we do in our life is wrong. I'm glad it's fair.
How long have you got? I mean, I can say.
The question to you is, this is all great, lots of good work, lots of amazing papers, and prospects and biscuits along the way, which is great. What are you most excited about? Where is this going to go? Let's say we are careful, we make less and less mistakes, and we are as careful as we can so that we have the liability to address the question before. What does excite you the most now, let's say 10 years, 20 years?
So as a modeler, what really excites me right now is not what the research fund is fun though, but that's different. So we always try as engineers to help the clinicians fix the acute problem. So there is an aneurysm, we need to fix it, right? So there is a patient with atherosclerosis, we need to take it out, right? So what we don't realize is that with many of these medical interventions, although we sort out the problem, the immediate problem, we create a lot of problems further down the line, but that's okay because you wanted to save the patient because it was necessary, etc., right? So I am really, really excited about using these mechanistic models with AI to try to help predict the trajectories of what's going to happen to these patients when the condition becomes chronic or in the long term. So that is the real challenge for me. And to be able to integrate data at different scales of organization, from genes to tissues to blood flow, etc., in a system that actually makes sense, and we can guide these intelligent machines to actually make decisions because they can learn, because the mechanistic models tell them a little bit the way. So they say, we know the links between these two things. You don't have to work it out. We have worked it out for you. We know the link between these two things, so you can go and move on. And I think that's what's really exciting for me. It's not about the pure, let's reshuffle this data. I mean, that is not exciting at all, actually. But it's about what we learn and what we as humans put into it, the information that we gather and that we can formulate as mechanistic understanding. So after all the hard questions, so I said, do not choose violence today. So obviously you didn't listen to me, but no, I mean, I'm kidding. Thank you very much. It's time and there is wine. So I thank you very much for taking the time and come here.